morning, Chairman. Chairman, sorry. Chairman, sorry, can you just unmute your microphone?
Yes, if we'd like to say good morning, everyone. Thank you, Cheryl. Sorry for the, you did remind me before we started. I do apologise. So I'd like to open the meeting as chairman, and we can turn to Cheryl now to confirm attendance, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If members could confirm they're present when their name is called. Councillor Spencer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Coupland.
Present.
Councillor Morn.
Present.
Councillor Parker.
Present.
Councillor Skinner. No. I've received apologies from Councillor Stokes. Ian Holdenby.
Present.
Andrew Middleton.
Present.
Thank you. The following officers are also in attendance. Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive, Mark Baxter, Chief Fire Officer, Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources, James Drury, Executive Director for Commercial, Glenn Garrett, Executive Director for Adult Care and Community Wellbeing, Andy Gutherson, Executive Director for Place, Lucy Pledge, Head of Internal Audit and Risk Management, Heather Sandy, Executive Director for Children's Services, Alistair Simpson, who is a Principal Auditor, Jill Thomas, Principal Auditor, Matthew Waller, Audit Manager, and myself, Cheryl Evans, and I'm a Democratic Services Officer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Cheryl. So moving on, could we have apologies that, as you say, from Councillor Stokes, Cheryl, I believe. That was all. Perhaps Councillor Skinner was correct. Thank you. So moving on to item 2, declaration of members' interests. So members to declare any interest using the chat function to request to speak if they have any declarations, please. Oh, I assume not. Thank you. So moving on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 16th of November 2020, pages 5 to 12 in the agenda pack. And I would propose that the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of November 2020 be confirmed as a correct record. So could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt, just for the purposes for the benefit of the listening audience, I just wanted to highlight that Councillor Skinner is now present in the meeting.
Yes, thank you for that, Cheryl. Thank you. Okay.
Morning, Chairman. I'm sorry I was unable to shout present because my iPad had frozen. I'm now in on a PC. Thank you.
No problem, Paul. Thank you so much. Nice to see you. So if we can then, so we'll confirm that we accept the minutes, and if we can move on to the combined assurance report, and thank you for all the directors for attending today. It's our annual chance to actually all get together, in this instance not in person unfortunately, but one hopes that that will not be the case next time when we have the combined assurance report agendaed. So I'd like now to turn to Debbie, Chief Executive Debbie Barnes, to introduce herself and present the her report, please. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, let's hope that this time next year that we are able to meet face to face. So thank you very much. Absolutely delighted to be here with the corporate leadership team, as well as with Mark Baxter, to introduce the combined assurance document. This is a number of years now we've been using this framework, and I'm sure you'll agree that it is a highly effective framework to assess risk across the council in terms of how our services are operating, how our projects are being implemented, and how effective our partnership working is across the public and the private sector across the county. As we become more familiar with it, I think we're getting much more consistency in the way that we determine and assess risk across the corporate leadership team as well. This year has been a very challenging year, I'm sure everybody would agree. And it's been a bit of a sort of crisis year, really, in terms of responding to the coronavirus challenges. And I think it's fair to say that it has tested our resilience and our capacity as leaders and also the totality of our workforce. But I am pleased that the way that our staff have risen to the challenge to support our vulnerable communities and have effectively supported our communities in relation to the COVID pandemic, whilst also continuing business as usual activity and also continuing to support transformation of the council. And if I just really highlight some of the challenges that we have had to deal with over the last sort of 12 months. So in relation to COVID, clearly we had to respond to support our communities who needed to shield and make sure that people had access to vital food supplies as well as to medicine supplies. Our business hub has been working with the LEP to make sure that our businesses have had access to advice and guidance, as well as working with our district colleagues to make sure that the availability of business grants. We've obviously supported our care sector, both from a residential perspective, but also from a home care perspective. Our waste services have considerably been stretched because of the increased volume of waste because people have been at home. Obviously, the LRF, the Local Resilience Forum, who have led the partnership work across the pandemic, and in particular fire and rescue, in the way that they've also been able to support our communities and supported our health colleagues to continue to provide much needed support and advice to our communities. And a huge thank you as well to public health. Derek in particular, I think, deserves a real mention in terms of the way that he has supported and provided advice and guidance in a very public way to our communities. And again, I think he's become very well known by our communities and very trusted by our communities. Clearly, whilst all that has been going on, our services have continued to deliver business as usual. And again, I'm really pleased to report that our performance in relation to our metrics, as well as our key projects, continues to be really strong, with only a minority of key performance indicators not reaching target, and those are very much associated with the challenge of the pandemic. And finally, the establishment of our transformation programme. Whilst we've always done transformation, particularly within the service areas, what the transformation programme has done is it has enabled us to shine a light and be much more, have much greater management oversight about all of the transformation programme activity that is happening in service areas and across the council. The key risk issues are identified in the report, and I just really want to talk through very briefly around what they are. Clearly, one of the critical areas of risk continues to be safeguarding. That, because of the restriction on home visiting and the reduced visibility of children due to the partial closure of schools, that has increased risk. The service areas, particularly children and adults, have got a lot of mitigation measures in place so that they risk assess families to make sure that our staff are continuing to do home visits with PPE for those high-risk families. Clearly, business continuity and resilience is a risk with staff working predominantly from home. Very few staff needing to work apart from those frontline staff. And again, I'm happy to report that we have now offered vaccinations to all of our frontline health and care staff in line with the government priority groups. And obviously, when we do look to return to the offices, clearly we need to make sure that they are COVID safe and have been risk assessed in terms of making sure that we have the right number of people in the offices in order for people to do social distancing. But we see through the smarter working that people will work in a much more hybrid way when people do return. Obviously, funding and the pandemic has placed extra strain on our budgets. Again, I'm really pleased with the way that managers have managed our budgets and responded to the additional income that the government has given us, and clearly that's been well received. And we've continued to utilise that grant to support our communities. But as you'll know, we're only looking to set a one-year budget because that's the position from government, and obviously it's important that the longer term position on fairer funding and the funding for adult social care is confirmed as soon as possible to enable us to continue to plan. The next risk really is around the adequacy of the market supply, and I think the management of our market, particularly for adult care and children's services, has been a challenge with regard to residential. Clearly from a children's perspective, we're looking at enhancing our in-house provision so that we are less reliant on the market, but particular market risks are around home to school transport, as well as children's and adult social care, but working very closely with the sector to mitigate those risks. IMT is the next risk that I want to identify, and again want to thank our IMT colleagues who responded incredibly well when we first were hit with the pandemic. We went from an infrastructure which only enabled about 400 people to be able to work at any time on our network, and now regularly we've got 3, 4, 5,000 people working on our network. So more to do, and clearly the implementation of Office 365 will continue to assist our workforce, but just really want to recognise the hard work of our IMT colleagues. And then finally, really in relation to our workforce, our human resources performance is strong. We've got low staff turnover, low sickness, but clearly recruitment and retention in high-risk areas, particularly social work, legal areas, engineers, continues. And obviously we're working very proactively to try and mitigate those risks. So I'll pause at that point, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That gives us a very good overview of where we are. And again, I'm sure all the committee would like to express our thanks to all our staff who have pulled out the stops to help us in this unprecedented time. And as I say, we hope that is concluded by the vaccination programme. And also a thanks to Derek again for obviously all his work on the public health angle. So thank you to everyone. And so what I would like to do is, following from Debbie's comments, members, perhaps we could, we'll take it, obviously everyone's read the full text of all our directors' comments. So I'd like to open the meeting up to questions from the members to the executive directors and the chief fire officer, as you feel appropriate. So I'll hand over to members for their questions to the executive directors and the chief fire officer. Thank you.
Chairman Andrew Middleton wishes to speak.
Thank you, Charles. Sorry, I've got hands up and I've got no names to the hands, so I was struggling a little bit here. Yes, thank you, Andrew. Can I turn to you then, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, it is very reassuring, Mrs. Barnes, that you've kept the show on the road so effectively. It suggests that you mended the roof when the sun was shining and you had resilience built into the system. Few questions, if I may, a couple of challenges. Safeguarding children. From my perspective in the NHS, we are anticipating a tsunami of low-level mental health conditions when the true state of non-engagement, non-school attendance, etc. becomes clear. Is there any possibility of, given that one of the main routes for identifying concerns in teenagers and others is in schools, and that has been frustrated. Is there any way of getting ahead to address these issues when they are teenage anxieties and they haven't escalated into being mental health psychosis conditions? And secondly, if I may, a theme running throughout your report and some of the divisional reports is can't get the staff, difficult to get workforce, which seems perverse given the numbers who probably would find a local authority permanent position a very attractive prospect, given the redundancies that have and will come forward in other sectors of the economy. Are we doing enough to make ourselves attractive, given that not everybody instantly leaps to think that local authority is the number one choice, to rebut some of the myths and to project some of the benefits? The fact that it is very unlikely, pensions excellent, working conditions and career progression is excellent. Could we do more to make local authority positions more attractive?
Thank you very much. I'll respond back to both of those, and then I don't know if any of my colleagues will want to come in. So with regard to the first issue around mental health support, absolutely. The issue in terms of prevalence around mental health, particularly around teenagers, is of significant concern. In Lincolnshire, we have quite strong preventative services. So we provide Healthy Minds, which is a support service around emotional well-being to try and support people before mental health issues materialise. So it's like a preventative service. We also have an online service called Couth that's accessed by young people, and it has a wide take-up. So clearly we work really strongly with child and adolescent mental health services, but they also deliver preventative services, not just those support services for when people have been diagnosed with a mental health issue. Doing a lot of work in terms of mental health in schools. We're currently a pilot site around expanding that support in schools. But I think that you're absolutely right in terms of the issue around young people not being at school at the moment. But apart from clearly vulnerable children. But I'm confident that the Healthy Minds and our online provision is available to support people preventatively. With regard to recruitment, the issue of recruitment isn't necessarily across the whole council. It tends to be in particular areas such as social work, legal, engineers. So there is a strategy around those hard to recruit posts. We do a lot of train our own. So, for example, children's social workers, we would recruit people into early help, into our residential, and then we would train them up and encourage them through the apprenticeship route to be able to then go on and become social workers. So we do a lot of train our own. I think with regard to the opportunities around more remote working, doesn't have to be a barrier now, that we could look at recruitment across the wider country, because not everybody will need to travel every day, and that's something that clearly COVID has taught us. So we are doing a lot of work to try and improve the recruitment in those hard to recruit areas, but they do nationally pose a challenge to us. Again, if we look at some of our rates compared to elsewhere, our agency rates are relatively low, but again, we want to be even better. So it tends to be in those issues which are those posts which are national recruitment issues as well.
Thank you, Debbie. Perhaps would Heather like to come in on the children's services perspective on that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I think Debbie's covered at a high level all of the services that we have on offer. What I would like to add to that, we also worked really hard over the summer and we rolled out training for all school leads. We trained 310 schools in Lincolnshire in a trauma-informed approach to responding to children when they came back into school. And as Debbie outlined, we're trailblazers in the mental health in schools pilot, and we worked really hard last week to promote our offer across social media in response to the Mental Health Awareness Week for children and young people.
Thank you, Chair. Might I add a supplementary? Heather, yeah. Is there any differential response from county schools versus academies?
No, the academies work really closely with us in Lincolnshire. They respond. You know, the way we work with our county schools and our academy schools is Lincolnshire children are Lincolnshire's children, regardless of which type of establishment they sit in. So the offer was funded for all schools and engaged with equally by all schools.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a quick follow on from what Andrew said, Heather. How are we coping with this special school scenario? I know it's been very challenging for children with autism and those sort of conditions that find social isolation and disruption to normal schedules very hard to handle.
That's right. So our schools have worked really hard alongside providing places for those children who need them. They're also engaged in lots of outreach, lots of pastoral care. They've had their teams calling those families each week to check on families to see whether their situation's the same, whether perhaps their needs have changed and they now need to access a school place. And then alongside that, our own teams have phoned every child in Lincolnshire with an education, health and care plan. They've phoned their families to see what their situation is and whether they need any support. It is a really difficult time. It's a really difficult time. I'm sure we can all relate with children without additional needs. And as you say, for those for whom routine's really important, it's brought additional challenges. And I think schools have responded really well to that. I think that's a situation we need to continue to monitor. We need to continue to stay in contact with those families and to respond as those needs change over time.
Thank you, Heather. I will pass over now to Ian Holdsby and then Alex and then Rob, if that's okay. I'm just looking at the indications to speak at the moment. Thank you.
Ian, you're muted at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Concentrating on too many things. Debbie, can I just reiterate what Andrew said as well? If there was a way of finding out some budget to buy thousands of "We Kept Calm and Carried On" mugs, I think there's a very good story for that one. I'll get a couple of the pedantic points out of the way first, please, if we can. Mark, possibly for you, on page 40, we talk about we talk about RDS. I'm not actually sure what RDS is. I can't actually find what RDS is defined as and what the expansion is. Just that's fine, easy. The other one really is on page 22 on the strategic risks. On the second paragraph, it says the unprecedented events of COVID, etc., have resulted impacted on culture around risk management. That just seems to be a throwaway sentence. There's no expansion of the "and so what" piece. So what are the impacts? I suppose my main question or observation is that when we look at strategic risks and taking some of the comments you made, Debbie, around, most of the times when people talk about strategic risks, they are on a state of relatively slow change and relatively slow directional movement. This year's been up in the air completely. But we seem to be saying that the direction of travel of assurance and all our strategic risks is positive and upwards, which kind of doesn't fit with what I think 2020 and into 21 has shown us, because it's not so much the assurance isn't improving. Actually, the nature, the very size and scale of all the risks on the strategic elements have fundamentally changed. And as you said, when we start to recover from COVID, the reset position is going to be fundamentally different as well, in many different guises. So I think if I just looked at that and strategic risks, and I appreciate, and I'll let the councillors go into the specific areas, it just seems really inconsistent with the world to say that we've got either a couple of remaining the same, but the direction of travel of assurance is increasing, when actually I'm probably looking at the risk rating side and saying it's fundamentally changed. So actually the stuff that we were relying on before may not be valid. I don't know if that's too stark a challenge, but it just doesn't feel congruous.
Thank you, Ian. Debbie, you want to come back to me?
Yes, so I think Andrew wants to come in, and I think Mark will want to come in on the particular points.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I'll come in after Andrew.
Oh, thank you. We'll hand over to Andrew and Martin, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. Yeah, it's a fair challenge, Ian, as you say. I think our learning of managing risk during 2020 is one of almost rapid refinement of our existing processes. So we have got well established risk management processes here, more so than in other organisations that I've worked of. And Lucy and I and the wider group, which includes councillors as well, have worked very hard over the last sort of 18 months. We had it as a specific directorate objective this time last year to strengthen those processes. So coming back to Mr. Middleton's comments about sort of fixing the roof while the sun was shining last year, we were ready for COVID. We've been able to utilise those internal structures to capture risk and controls. And, you know, coming back to this broader piece about us being a well-run council can deal with things that get thrown its way, and I'm content that we've done that, you know, particularly from my statutory responsibilities. But we've also been fleet of foot as well, so we've brought risk to the fore in our corporate leadership team meetings. We meet 2 times a week at the moment. There were times at the start of the crisis where we were meeting every day, and risk was very quickly into that arena. So we were all aware of it, and actually, as a result of COVID, I think our risk management processes and practices are indeed strengthened and have been brought up and are in a lot more consistent place than they were this time last year. So.
Just before we move on to Mark, could I respond then, Andrew? Because I think that's a really good narrative. That doesn't come through in the report as well as you've just described it.
I think you're on mute, Andrew.
Sorry, thanks for that feedback then. And then actually we can strengthen, as Debbie says, around, you know, she mentioned earlier about consistency as well. Absolutely, I think we need to probably be better at championing some of the good stuff.
Absolutely.
That we do. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark, I think Ian wanted to know what RDS stood for. So, Anderson.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. Again, the details is always important if we're trying to communicate the message in regards to that. So RDS is about a retained duty system. And that's the overarching phrase that describes the duty system that our on-call firefighters operate throughout the county. So obviously they're our firefighters that are contracted for us for a certain amount of hours and provide us operational cover, but they also mainly have a primary employment by under businesses and respond to us as and when they are required. So hopefully that clears up that description there for you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, if just put it in the report as well, so I know. That'd be great.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll do.
And just as a supplementary from the chair, Mark, in terms of what Debbie said about recruitment, are we still managing to attract the right candidates for retained firefighters, or is that more of an issue now because of the current restrictions?
So that's probably our biggest ongoing challenge is in regards to the recruitment, but just as importantly, the retention of our on-call firefighters. So the challenge we have, we automatically have a restriction in regards to the type of people that we need to attend our local fire stations. So it's clear they have to live within a 5-minute area of the station, so we can ensure that we've got a timely operational response. Now, fortunately, we're still seeing a healthy amount of applicants coming in through the recruitment. So the challenges that we have is in regards to ensuring that they are prioritised in regards to our more key stations that have recruitment and retention challenges. So we have the right people at the right stations. But also it's ensuring that once we have people through the door and we got them on the run, that we actually retain them. So the current challenge that we have at the moment, which has been going on for a number of years, is in fact that actually the longevity of people staying within being an on-call firefighter, because the amount of commitment that is required is absolutely quite enormous, and it's absolutely fantastic how people are willing to serve their communities. And as you identified, the COVID year has actually showed that in abundance, how it has been our on-call firefighters have stepped up to the mark and wanting to serve their communities, because they are part of the community, they live within the community. So we know it's a really important area for us to focus on. In regards to your specific point, has the COVID element impacted on it? It's impacted on it in regards to some of the practical elements of ensuring that we've had to do recruits courses slightly differently. And we've had to ask people to be more flexible and adaptable to ensure that we can train people in a COVID compliant manner, that we've got people safely through, which our training department have done a fantastic job working through that and achieved that. What we'll probably have more of an understanding will probably be in another 6 months to a year's time about the full impact of it. And that will be yet to play out. I'm hoping actually it's going to have a positive impact, because actually it's going to raise the profile, and actually that becoming an on-call firefighter, there are so many other ways how you can serve your community, and breaking some of the ongoing myths that we just put out fires and rescue cats from trees. Actually, there's a massive broad spectrum of roles that is quite rightly that fire and rescue can step into, and our on-call colleagues have been demonstrating that over the last 8 to 12 months. Really fantastic. So we're really using that as an opportunity to raise how much more people can do for their communities by joining the fire and rescue service. So we're hoping that we can almost turn this really difficult year in a positive spin for us. But again, we won't really understand how that's going to impact on our recruitment until later on. So it's really retention is the element that we're really going to be focusing on. Hopefully that answer your question, Chair.
Yes, it does, Mark. Thank you so much. If I could pass on now to Alex, and then Rob, and then Paul, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions that I've written down, if you don't mind. First, I'd like to thank Debbie and all the directors for their report. I think it's always a really useful agenda item every year, this one. It gives us a sort of real snapshot of everything that's going on across the council, and it's both interesting and useful. And I want to pick up on a few different themes. So the first one is market supply. So I've got a question really both for Glenn and also for Heather. So just coming to Glenn first, in terms of adult social care, it's mentioned that there's an 8% drop in residential placements last year. We know that that's been sort of a high risk for the council for a number of years, that market supply. So I just wondered if you could elaborate, please, on what work has been going on to shore up that supply and to make sure that when we're through the other side of COVID, that we have got those placements in the county for our residents that need them. And then on the same theme for Heather, really, I want to ask about children's and home to school transport. I think we have discussed this as well at scrutiny. We've got that question of supplier viability post COVID. I wondered if you could elaborate, please, for the committee on what work is being undertaken to shore up that supply once we're through the other side of COVID. And I'll pause there, Chair, before I move on to my other questions, if that's okay.
Thank you. Do we want to go to Glenn first and then Heather? Or vice versa?
So, thank you, Chair. And good morning, committee members. It's nice to be back, I think, for my 9th audit committee meeting. So it's delightful to be here again. Residential care has actually declined nationally in terms of its usage. In some parts of the country, it's over 15% reduction. We're currently doing a piece of work in Lincolnshire with the sector to look at what that means. It's typically related to residential homes, not nursing homes. And that is less worrisome for us because we have an oversupply of residential care in Lincolnshire. Some members will be very familiar with the housing agenda that we're pushing. That housing agenda is deliberately targeted at reducing the use of residential services. So, as it were, COVID has created an environment in which we were already preparing for alternative options for people. Our challenge is that it's coming so quickly. I would have preferred 5 or 6 years in which to better manage the transition away from residential care to the scale that we've currently seen. And it's come within a year. So you'll appreciate that's generated its own pressures. But of course, the residential market is a mix of public and private, roughly 50-50. And the biggest impact has been people choosing not to buy their own residential care from private means. And the consequence of that is that they're staying at home for longer. The challenge there is to supply enough home care support and wraparound prevention and daycare services so that people can be sustained carefully and safely at home, which is the council's policy and has been for a number of years. So although it might sound rather worrisome, actually it's the direction we should be going in anyway. And I think by and large, we've been able to cover the provision in the, as it were, community to replace that which otherwise would have taken would have occurred in the residential setting. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Glenn. I think one of the things I sort of pick up on, if you like, is the negative press there's been around COVID and care homes. And I just wonder, do you feel that has impacted on people thinking about the future and thinking, is that the best place for my parent, for my relative, because of that negative press around the transmission of COVID within those type of settings? Do you worry about that and whether people would choose that provision in the future because of the pandemic and you know how that's happened?
Thank you, Chair, through you. Yes, in short, both nationally and locally, it is clear that particularly for self-funded residents, people buying their own care, there has been an impact as a result of the media. I should mention, of course, that in Lincolnshire, we have had a very low death rate typically when compared to other parts of the country, particularly during wave 1 back in the spring of 2020. The challenge that we've got is, I think, reassuring people that the care and provision that we have in Lincolnshire is actually really, really good. So our Care Quality Commission figures for quality are one of the highest in the region. And we know that we are, as it were, managing COVID positive discharges from hospital rather better than many of our colleagues, because we've got an arrangement with community hospitals and the residential sector, which means that, again, we're managing the transmission within homes as much as we might be between hospitals and homes. And that's been a big driver of deaths in residential care across the country elsewhere. So we're not in a bad position, but yes, you're right. There's a bit of work to be done, I think, to reassure people in the community that residential care will remain a safe option in the future, albeit at a lower level, perhaps.
Thank you, Glenn. Just to follow on from that, in terms of could you just comment on the rising cost of residential care in regard to people's decisions, perhaps to have care at home? Because obviously those are sort of issues that families look at as well as the health issues.
Thank you, Chair. This might prove to be one of those questions that takes up all of the committee's available time. So
just a snapshot.
Exactly, Chair. Where to begin? 2021, I think, historically, will be seen as an artificial year financially. It was a year in which the government, frankly, chucked money our way to spend in a very time-limited fashion that potentially creates something of a cliff edge for councils when we get into 21, 22 and beyond. So this temporary funding that comes through a myriad of different grants is generating a very artificial environment, particularly in my sector. That worries me, less so for Lincolnshire, but more so at a national level, because a lot of councils don't have the financial wherewithal and the financial position that we benefit from here. Having said that, I do know that the government intends to come forward in the coming months with proposals for the reform of social care, which includes long-term funding. So we look forward to that with interest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Glenn. Yes, a very difficult question all round, I think. Thank you. Alex, you had a question for Heather, I believe.
I did, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. So the question was around the home to school transport and how we're ensuring that providers' viability is protected as far as possible during the pandemic, given that we have a reliance on the providers that we've got. So we've been following the government's national procurement policy, which is to ensure that providers aren't disadvantaged when they're not making provisions because schools are closed. So obviously our funding hasn't been cut. We're continuing to work with those costs that providers will continue to have, such as their vehicle maintenance, their staffing, and just keeping that funding there so that they shouldn't be disadvantaged during the pandemic. We've also had additional grants from central government to fund additional home to school transport routes. That's where we wanted to remove scholars from the public transport routes, which were particularly busy. So we funded additional routes, which has supported some providers as well.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather. Chair, do you want me to go on to my other questions, or should I let somebody else?
If you could, please, and if it's like, depending on how many you've got, I'm quite anxious that to fit everybody in. But yes, carry on, Alex.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Another question for you, Heather. Sorry. Just want to come back to, in the report, it talks about the impact of lockdown on families, and I know we've discussed this before at scrutiny as well. And I just wondered if you could give the committee some assurances over what we can do to mitigate those risks. You know, we've got families who are, you know, where there perhaps are issues, tensions, families who in other circumstances would be identified as being troubled families needing support, children needing to be placed in care. How can the council monitor this, you know, with lockdown, with social distancing, and you know, and those restrictions? Because it is something that I imagine worries you and your team a lot.
Okay, so I think the key message I'd want to give here is to say that we are still operating. Our safeguarding lines remain open. They're very active. We're seeing increased referrals from neighbours and from family members, and that message is definitely getting out into the public sphere. We continue to work to safeguard children. We now have sufficient PPE to enable face-to-face visits to continue as usual. So we're still very active in this space, but we're also very active with our schools. We know schools have lots of contact with young people, and our schools are really making contact with those families on a regular basis. So we are working with police, with our health colleagues, through our learning partnership, to ensure that everybody is active in the safeguarding world, and that we're making sure that we're bringing those concerns through. I'm really pleased to see in this second lockdown, we haven't seen a decline in referrals from schools. They're really still connected to their families, and they're still continuing to refer to us when they are concerned. And they're actually referring to us where perhaps they're struggling to get hold of a family, just so we can do a safe and well check, and we're working with them to support them in those ways.
Thanks, Heather. It's really pleasing to know that schools are still making those referrals as well, because I'm sure most of us acknowledge that schools are in a lot of ways the closest to families, and they know what's happening with their young people. So that's good to hear, because I know you said after the first lockdown there was a drop in those referrals. Chair, if you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions to finish off for Andrew, please.
Thank you.
So, Andrew, I just want to touch upon really the pension fund and the risks around that. It's one of those sorts of big items that, you know, could have real long-term impacts on the county's pension fund, and obviously it's not just our own staff that pay into that as well. There's lots of staff in academy schools and other organisations that are affected. So I just wondered if you could give us some assurances over what work is being undertaken in the background to manage those risks, and secondly, sort of looking ahead really to future funding settlement. We know that next year we can only set a one-year budget. And I think Glenn mentioned earlier some of those problems in adult social care, which is just one area of the council. only being able to set 1 year is a problem. Do we have any indication of, from the government of when there'll be a longer term settlement? And do we expect that to be favourable? We've had this fairer funding campaign for quite a few years, but to date, I think there's not a huge amount of evidence to suggest that the government looks upon our arguments favourably.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Moore. Yeah, I'll start with the pension fund one. Well, management of risk, I guess, is inherent in managing the whole pension fund as a matter of course, really. I think if you were to sit in on any of our pension committees, Peter Jones, our independent advisor on pensions, he's very clear that we've had numerous challenges throughout the years in terms of managing the pension fund. Brexit might be deemed one of them, and he's very clear that localised or regional things like that aren't actually a big deal. They might have an impact, but they're not. But COVID being such a global event is a bit more of a bigger deal, naturally, as you'd imagine, because all corners of the global economy are being challenged by it. I guess looking back over the past year in terms of how it's impacted on us, clearly markets were very, very slow at one point in terms of investment returns very early on, but have picked up quite considerably. And the next pension committee will show that we had Morgan Stanley, who's one of our custodians recently, to talk specifically about investment performance, and the uptick in the last quarter of the year has been incredible, actually. And you'll see that parts of the global economy are very much in an up and down scale. But I guess the assurance for the committee around that management of risk is it's inherent in the way that we deploy our management of the investments, and I guess the spread that we've got across the different asset portfolios. But I'm happy to share any other further information that may be of use to you, Councillor Moore, in terms of trying to show you how we manage that risk, because it is quite complicated, and more than happy to extend an invitation for a session with me and Joe Ray if you'd like to learn a bit more about that. Funding, it's a challenge, I think, in terms of doing my job, and Michelle's on the call as well. We talk regularly about this, and this annual cycle that we're in now of just having 1 year at a time is difficult. So we know that formally that the fair funding review has been put back a year, but we've also heard that that might not be the end of it either. Because there's still a lot of work to be undertaken around distribution methodologies that were supposed to be consulted upon last year. The actual quantum of the funding, as Glenn's referred to, if there is a radically different social care funding model, that'll have a massive impact on the overall pot of funding available too. You're right, we have been lobbying for a number of years, and we continue to do so. The county councils network, of which we're a part, and the leader of the council is a key part, particularly on the funding and devolution side, continues to make the case to government. That has worked to good effect during the COVID crisis, where counties have done well from the funding. But I will point, I guess, the sting in the tail is, as that distribution has changed over the period of the crisis, funding has been shifted towards areas of deprivation rather than areas of, sparsity, which is a key factor of a county council area. And I guess looking back, and I think we did touch upon it at this session this time last year, because it was in the immediate aftermath of the general election, the whole red wall concept, that I guess the broader the base, and it's difficult can't go into political terms, but the broader the base of councils that make up the Conservative Party nationally is a broader base to which to keep happy, isn't it, I guess? And that is a risk, I guess, for us specifically as as a county area, with some of those factors such as deprivation on the table. So naturally we'll keep the committee and councillors aware of what's happening as it develops, but there is a chance it might not be settled this time next year, I guess is what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Can I just ask a follow-up question, Chair? Just just to touch on that funding really, and I suppose one of the worries is that because we've managed a lot of those financial risks and reductions in funding so well, we're actually not seen as being at the front of the queue for any sort of additional monies, and I suppose that's the catch-22. By doing the job well, we aren't first in line. Now, just sort of coming back to that, looking at the political landscape, I'm not going to get political, but there is a worry, of course, that because we aren't seen as being in that in the most needy parts of the we aren't going to get that funding. Now, one of the things we have seen in our county council year-on-year cost pressures in our budget, even this year, there are significant cost pressures, increases in the number of adults and children with complex needs, increases in the living wage. So at what point do you think that those cost pressures exceed sort of the annual token increases that we get from government? Are you worried that if we don't see a significant increase, we are going to be in a position where the small amount of reserves that we use each year to balance the budget won't be sufficient?
Okay, so yeah, there's two parts to that question, wasn't there, really, Councillor Morn? So I'd say that I don't think councils in financial crisis are limited to any particular type of grouping. So clearly at the moment we can see that councils like Croydon and Nottingham City are in challenging situations. Both have got support and government review teams in. That's a London borough and a unitary. Clearly, a couple of years ago, Northamptonshire were in trouble too, and naturally they've been through that process now, where they've gone through the unitarisation process and will be going live with those unitaries in April. So I don't think purely the only way that a national system will work will be through some sort of distribution methodology, and I don't think, given what I've just said there, that you can. I guess you could focus resources on a particular type of council because they've all gone through different challenging periods. It comes down to, at the end of the day, whether you're firm enough with your financial management, whether you take the decisions at the right time and to the right level, and are prepared to stand by those decisions, but continue to move forward as well. So this council's got a strong history of all of that because it's taken its savings at the right time when it's needed to and managed it within its funding envelope well, but it's also not resting on its laurels. So you just talked about managing demand there, Councillor Moore, and we've got a lot of work going on internally at the moment around managing demand both in adults and children's, both within the general fund area and within the dedicated schools budget as well. So we're putting resource and time and effort into managing ahead of the curve so that we can manage within our means as much as we can. The financial strategy that we're going to council on the 19th of February, you're right, our pressures go up by, £5-10 million per year. So there needs to be a way of managing those pressures. We've said we've got a good history of delivering savings when we've said we've done, which is a lot of councils can't point to that. And naturally we've got other initiatives such as the transformation programme that Debbie talked about at the start, which will have quantitative as well as qualitative benefits to the organisation. So we're doing all the right things. We've got we're in a really strong position where in a week last week where it was announced that 6 to 12 councils were applying to central government for capitalisation directives to bail out their budgets for next year. We're nowhere near that spectrum. We're the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of our financial position, and is a lot for the council to be proud of, I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Alex.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, Andrew. I think we know that the council has made a lot of difficult decisions early on, and we are in a better position for that. So thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alex. I'm sorry to keep you so long, Rob. I know you've had your hand up for some time, so can I pass over to you? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. My first question actually relates to cyber security, and I'm interested in knowing whether or not, given that our recognition of that as one of our challenges, our strategic risks, whether or not it's getting better. Okay, because I can remember us discussing it last year, and yes, there it was on our agenda. So in a sense, it's about direction of travel. Okay. Are we still in the same situation of cybersecurity being a high risk, or could we have some assurance, and I'm using the word assurance in a general rather than a specific way, to say, although it's still a high risk, it's somewhat better than it was as a higher risk last year? Is our direction of travel positive?
Thank you, Rob. Andrew, do you want to respond, or James? Oh, James, I do apologise, James. I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
I should have said it was directed to James.
Oh, it was James. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Parker. Good morning, everybody. I think with cybersecurity, I would be wrong, and I think anyone would be wrong to say that it shouldn't be a risk, whatever we do with it, however effectively we manage it, because with cybersecurity, it's the type of thing that whatever we or any other organisation do to try and mitigate it, other people with different intent will do all they can to try and get around that. And that's the constant battle, if you like, that we and other organisations have. What we've got in place is effective management and monitoring of attempts of cyber attacks on us. And we're certainly not unique in that. We don't have any more than other similar sized organisations, but we do have quite a few attempts. And many of them are from robots, in effect, so they're not necessarily targeting Lincolnshire County Council specifically, they're just trying it on with a biggish organisation. I think our position is stronger than it was a year ago. I think the direction of travel is positive, and we have really, really good software now that monitors all of these attacks and prevents virtually every one of them getting through to date. There are clearly linked to that software then is also the staff training as well around awareness not to click on strange links or suspicious looking things and things like that, and that's mandatory training as well for all our staff. And we are managing it well, and I believe, Councillor Parker, our direction of travel is a positive one. We're in a better position than we have been before. However, I cannot guarantee that we will not be hit by, well, we certainly will be hit by cyber attacks. I cannot be absolutely confident that we will not prevent one of those getting through. And there are organisations that spend literally millions and millions of pounds on cyber security based on their data and based on their risk, and they still have some cyber attacks that do get through. So I don't want to give the impression that because we're managing effectively, that means there is no risk to us. I think it should remain a high risk because, unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. Our reliance on home working and more mobile and agile working, there was a little bit of concern that that might increase our risk, but the monitoring has shown that we have coped well with all of that. And our position has continued to improve despite the fact that we've now got the vast majority of our workforce working from home, which does bring in an additional dynamic, if you like, to that risk. So I'm confident the direction of travel is positive, but I just want to manage expectations really around the fact that I cannot give a guarantee that we will not be hit at some point by a successful cyber attack, despite all the things we are doing, I believe, well to manage that situation.
Okay, so thank you. My next question really is about Brexit, which does not, given the world that we're operating in at the moment and have been and the future, get much attention. It's in relation to who's going to respond. It's a resources issue. You know, Brexit has an impact on the street, business rates. On the other hand, there's a place issue in relation to economic regeneration. So if things don't go too well for Brexit, then we can suffer financially because of issues around the business rates. And at the same time, our economic regeneration activities are even more challenging. So Andrew may want to comment on the impact on the business rates, and Andy might want to concentrate on the issue there, because these are risks to our economy internally and externally as far as the wider Lincolnshire population is concerned.
Thank you, Bob. Who wants to go first?
Shall I go first? Shall I go first?
Andy, thank you.
Mine will be pretty brief, I guess. So it's as you rightly point out, Councillor Parker, it's one of a number of factors that we naturally have to keep an eye on, I guess, in terms of our future financial viability. COVID is the most marked of those at the moment. Debbie talked about the financial impacts of that in year, but naturally, Brexit and the longer term impacts on business rates funding and anything else that we get in terms of funding is naturally going to be important. I guess the other bit to bear in mind is that when I responded to Councillor Moore just a short while ago, naturally the focus is on fair funding, but we've also been in a period of 2 or 3 years now where we've been expecting the business rate system to be reformed. It hasn't been yet, and that's another key part of that. And there's press articles over the weekend, wasn't there, around online sales taxes. There's talk about the Treasury looking at abolition of stamp duty and or council tax and everything else, and replacing that with property taxes. So there's a big question around the future of taxation, I guess, nationally, and how that impacts upon how we operate and how we are funded. And it may not, fair funding may get lost in all of that, actually, and that's something else for us to bear consideration to. I don't know whether Andy wants to add on anything from the sort of like the local economy side.
Okay, thank you for the question, Councillor Parker. As you're aware, obviously, we've got a number of key sectors that are heavily dependent in terms of the export-import market. And we obviously continue through our links into those sectors to understand the sort of day-to-day problems and issues that those sectors actually experience, and therefore try to actually stay ahead of the game in terms of perhaps some of those key operational risks that are in place. One initiative that was picked up in the context of some of the fears from the food industry was the establishment of a border control post down in Spalding, which obviously was designed to actually remove some of the sort of problems and issues that have been reported more widely in the press. The feedback, predominantly anecdotal through sort of like intelligence lines, is that that's doing what it was intended to do. And we are not getting significant localized problems being identified for the logistics companies and the food businesses. There are consequences in terms of certain elements of the supply chain. Doing my shopping on our local market on Saturday, apparently spring onions can't get imported from Mexico at the moment. So there are singular issues that are affecting things that you might want to see on your plate at this time of the year potentially. But the sector and the industry seem to be sort of like reacting positively. We continue to look at the trends in terms of employment data. Our unemployment rates have stayed relatively stable over the last quarter, so it's not giving rise to sort of concerns that there are significant impacts in terms of businesses closing and such like. But again, that intelligence needs to be monitored. We need to understand the ongoing implications and potential risks that are associated with that. In relation to that, we continue therefore to work with our district partners in terms of looking at the sort of type of schemes, the type of investment opportunities that need to be supported. And again, Boston Borough Council were successful the back end of last year of securing investment from a company called Plant and Bean. So again, a food sector industry that's actually confirming the benefits of investing in a place like Lincolnshire. They could have gone to 2 or 3 other places around the country, and they've got the confidence in terms of actually what's available and how the public sector will support their ambitions and their aspirations to be part and parcel of our economy going forward.
Thank you, Andy. Bob?
Yeah, Heather, in your key messages, you refer to safeguarding and the pandemic, and you've already spoken about it, but the pandemic, this is what the report says: the pandemic continues and there is still medium and long-term uncertainty, and that's the word I'm interested in, uncertainty, with regard to any impact on a number of things: staff capacity, future funding pressures, placement provision for children in care. Okay, so you did make points about those. I'm interested in this medium and long-term uncertainty? Because long-term takes us, way into the future, doesn't it? Could you just say something about? I'm pleased to see it's not there short-term. In other words, the here and now. But tell us more about what you see as those uncertainties in the medium and long term about staffing, funding, and placement provision for children in care.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Parker. Thank you, Chair. So I think the uncertainties in children's services from the pandemic in the medium and long term is the unpredictability in terms of the impact on families. It's the length of time it takes to reverse some of the challenges that we see in children. So we know we've seen a rise, for example, in the number of children coming into care. And if I can kind of use that as a bit of an example, what we've seen during the pandemic is a reduction in the number of foster care placements available to us. That's been because the average age of a foster carer in Lincolnshire is 56. So many of our foster carers were shielding, either because they were clinically extremely vulnerable or they were over 70. So the amount of placements available to us deteriorated quite quickly, and we had to rely on independent placements and out-of-county placements. Now, what we don't know, as those restrictions die away, the uncertainty is how many of those foster carers will choose to begin fostering again. And that's an uncertainty to us. We've worked really hard around recruiting additional foster carers during the pandemic and trying very hard to highlight those opportunities to people who are out of employment as a result of the pandemic as well, those that would be right for foster caring. But that is something that is an uncertainty to us going forward. The other areas of uncertainty include the market. Debbie, in her introduction, talked about market supply. We've seen a big increase in the price of placements for children. Demand is definitely outstripping supply. And what we need to see as we come out of the pandemic is whether those prices come back to a more stable place. And again, Andrew's talked about that, the government grants that we've had that have been able to support us to manage some of that. We don't know how long those grants are going to continue. We don't know how they'll end. What we do know in children's services is those funding pressures and those placement pressures won't end suddenly. It will take a long time for us to be able to bring those children back into placements if those placements become available. In terms of the staff capacity uncertainty, since the time of writing, I feel much more confident about that, Councillor Parker, because of the vaccination programme. And again, as Debbie outlined, the number of children's services frontline staff who've been vaccinated. In terms of our capacity, I'm much more confident about resilience in the sector. But we do still have those recruitment challenges, which we continue to work through.
Thank you. And finally, if I could go to Debbie. And some horizon scanning. I realise this is a report which is about the here and now, but looking back, we've seen a slight deterioration in the sense that we've had a move from our positive assurances into a slight move into not being able to say. In other words, one of the green ratings has gone. Anyway, my point is about the future. Just bearing in mind what we heard from Heather and the uncertainty about finance. But could you give us some feel about what we might call the report this time next year, in the sense of how we are responding to these pressures and whether or not council do anything to support any of the particular actions?
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Parker. So in terms of the report this time next year, clearly we have been able to set a one-year budget, which is really positive, and Andrew has said obviously where our current financial position is. I think some of the challenges are probably a bit longer term than that, Councillor Parker. So I think the assurity and the confirmation about the fairer funding, I think confirmation about how adult social care in particular will be funded, and the future of adult social care and its relationship with health. I think that we need to know what the government's response is in relation to adult social care and funding in particular, in order for us to be able to plan with any certainty. And I think then the other issue where we need some certainty so that, again, we can plan is around the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Clearly a significant level of funding that would go into infrastructure. And I think planning on a one-year basis is okay, but I mean, I'm sure that this committee would be expecting us to plan much more long-term. And to me, those are the issues that really we need to have some certainty over the next 12 to 18 months to enable us to plan much more longer term.
Thank you. That's one other question.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, Karen.
It's really to do with, I feel that this report, to a certain extent, could be improved by two things, and they really are relatively small. The first one is to show what was the scores this time last time, in the sense that we can then make a quick comparison between red, amber and green. Ever so simple, really, no brainer. But and the second thing is that whether it's this committee or another committee, the responsibility of the executive may be in a report to be actually be doing a bit of horizon scanning that actually embraces some of the recognitions of where we're at the moment in terms of finance, staffing levels, all of the things that we've just been talking about, to have a 1 year and maybe 3 year approach, because without it, it's difficult for us to be able to do anything other than accept, and that's not a wrong thing, accept this report on face value without looking back or without looking forward. That's my point. And maybe can have discussions outside this meeting to have something put in place like that.
Yeah, I think they're really helpful comments, Councillor Parker, and we'll follow those up, and I'm sure Lucy may want to come in around that, but absolutely, I think that they're very helpful reflections from reading the report and something that we can take away.
Thank you, Debbie. Lucy, would you like to add anything?
Not particularly, only just to agree that we can definitely look at those things, and we do have some. We do look at emerging risks, but what we haven't done is assess them. So we can share those with the committee, and we can set up a meeting with Councillor Parker in the role of scrutiny, because we haven't had one of those this year. So where some of these questions can go a bit more deeper dive within working with the audit committees. So I can get those back on track.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Rob. Just to Andy, picking up on some of the points that Rob made regarding the economic fallout of Brexit, or potential fallout of Brexit and COVID. Have we got, Andy, any indication of how devastating this is going to be in terms of the COVID I'm talking about here, in terms of our high street offer? Because I can see there's all sorts of problems, particularly with the bringing in the property rates as well. And also on the, you did touch on the food industry workforce, particularly in the vegetable growing sectors. Are we having issues with that? And also, have we had any indication from some of our hauliers that they're having problems locating customs agents, or do they seem to be coping with that?
So, go back through those in reverse order. No information and evidence coming back to us from the logistics companies, the hauliers, of any specific problems or problems that are causing them anything of particular concern or a scale of concern. As I say, there's a range of sort of like groups that meet and come together, and they say, well, they've all got some tales of issues, not things that they are indicating at this stage are systematic and therefore causing them significant concerns, or matters that they expect us to intervene in. They are matters that they are dealing with through their industry and their trade groups, etc. In terms of the labour market, again, no immediate challenges over and above the normal challenges that exist in that sector. So again, it's, whilst obviously there's been a heavy reliance over the years on imported labour, Eastern European labour, they always have fluctuations in terms of peaks and troughs of challenges. And again, we monitored it closely all the way through last year in the context of the run-up to Brexit. And again, there were no significant matters that were so far beyond the ordinary that caused problems in terms of actually the industry being able to operate. In terms of the high street, I think that's again one of those areas where more work in terms of the, as Rob sort of termed it, the blue sky thinking and the creativity that's needed across the sectors, across the organisations is needed. Undoubtedly for all of us, when we come out of the sort of lockdown, the nature and look of our high streets is again going to be significantly different, with a range of those sort of prominent sort of names on the high street having again gone to the wall in recent weeks and months. Fundamentally, the whole retail sector is having to sort of look at how it operates, how it creates the market. We are expecting over the next month the town deals to be announced for towns, which again is an initiative that's already been launched by government to try and actually give some impetus to the opportunities of actually recreating a different sort of high street offer. But I think we all have to be honest and indicate and recognise that actually there's going to be significant challenges going forward in terms of how the high street needs to operate and how we create a different offer in the high street. Retail shopping, as we probably all known it for our lives, has probably gone, and we'll need to adapt accordingly.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Rob. If I could now move on to Paul, please, and then I think Andrew Middleton would like to come in again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As the meeting's gone on, fortunately, everything's become better. Start off with it sounded like you're all in a bucket, but we've got there now. I was going to point out the overall assurance I take as the big bucket thermometer, let's say, which is on page 31 of the report, and it's saying that the red risk is static at 1%. It's saying that from last year, it's amber is down from 35% to 34, and the green is up from 64 to 65. I take that as the health, and I think basically under the conditions, my thanks would go to the CEO, Debbie Barnes, and the whole team, both for the excellent figures in these times, and basically to the support to all the volunteers that are out in the community, both the county and district colleagues at testing and vaccination centres, the support that we've been able to give out to the community, all of those things, maybe not on this sheet, but they're there. One or two things that have just come up. The high street debacle is as much about high rents by investors. That's a double-edged sword. High rents mean maybe the shops aren't viable, but also those high rents are property companies, so it might bite us from the investments point of view as well. Andrew, while we're on the finance side, mentioned about sparseness and deprivation. Well, in Lincolnshire, we've got both. Going on to what Andy was saying about Plant and Bean, I was lucky enough to be part of getting Plant and Bean to Boston. It's obviously started in a fairly small way, but I hope by the end of the year that will be the largest such plant, not just in Lincolnshire, but the whole of Europe. So that's what we've brought to our area, and we've got other things on the go. Regarding Brexit, Port of Boston has actually established again a link with Holland, which it had in the past, bringing fresh produce in. And seasonality. If we're going to reduce our carbon footprint to zero, then we've very much got to get used to seasonality. But my proper question, after thanking everybody, would be around the challenges around transformation. It's for everybody, really. COVID's obviously driven change a lot quicker than probably normal change would be driven with agile working, etc. And I presume that some of these things will never go back to traditional working. Glenn's obviously mentioned what the effects are on his sector and residential care. So what are the challenges and the risks going on with this change? Is that around staff and supporting the staff from the mental health point of view as well? assurances I've got with the plan going on that we've got everything covered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you as well for everybody's kind words around our workforce. I have to say, I think the staff have worked incredibly hard over the last 10-11 months and showed great resilience and flexibility in the way that they've responded to the challenges. So I think that there are some real important issues really for the committee for me to share with the committee around the lasting impact. And clearly, the way that we've responded, there has been some real positives, and so that they want to continue to keep what's good and look at then mitigating some of the other challenges. So one of the programmes within the transformation programme is about smarter working, and I alluded to it. So that's very much about when we are able to return to the offices. And not looking at social restrictions, staff are saying that what they've enjoyed about COVID is that they have been able to have much more flexibility and choice about how they work, and they want to continue with that. And they've also been able to look at having more control, I suppose, over their emotional well-being. Now, the work from home 100% of the time, I think staff are struggling with, and lockdown 3 feels much more challenging because of the weather, the dark nights, than what it was in lockdown 1. But certainly staff are saying that they want to work in a much more hybrid type way. So sort of 2-3 days in the office and some time at home. And so to very much sort of embrace the notion really is that work is what you do, not where you go. So smarter working is looking about then how we're able to adapt and respond to that. Clearly, in order for us to do that, we need to continue to invest in our IMT. If we're looking at a much more remote and digital way of working, then absolutely we need to continue to support our workforce in relation to digitalisation and in relation to IMT infrastructure. So I think that's just one example of some of the things that will change, that we want to retain what people have said have been good. So, you know, more control and more choice over how they work and more control over their well-being. And we will continue to adapt to that. I think one of the things that I am proud of that Human Resources working with LPFT, Lincolnshire Foundation Partnership Trust, is about our emotional wellbeing offer that we have offered to our staff. We've continued to work with, as I say, our health colleagues to enhance our emotional wellbeing offer, and I think that we'll continue to grow and change and respond to that changing need as we move forward.
Thank you very much for that response, Debbie.
Thank you. Any further questions, Paul, to Debbie or others?
No, it's just exactly what I'd expect from a professional organisation. Thank you.
Just, Debbie, before you go, and picking up on Paul's points about the transformation programme, clearly it's somewhat in its infancy at the moment. I note that on the bottom of page 24, you said to assist with the implementation and realisation of the changes that the programme will bring, you're looking to establish a network of change influencers to provide local assistance and guidance with technical support. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So the transformation programme has got a range of projects within it. Some are about transformation in terms of true transformational change, and other things are about optimisation or modernisation. So there's a whole raft of different programmes within that. And we are asking our staff to work in a very different way. So smarter working will require them to work in a hybrid way. Clearly, a lot of investments in terms of digitalisation will mean that staff will have to communicate with each other, with our customers and with our businesses in a very different way. And so in order to do that, the best way that we can embed change is by looking to our workforce to do that. So the more that staff are able to support and challenge and advocate that new way of working between themselves, then clearly that sort of change is is always much better received than a sort of top-down approach. So we went out to these staff and said, we'd really like people who are really keen to take on that advocacy role to support their colleagues. They don't need the technical understanding, but actually want to look at supporting their colleagues to be able to champion what's happening, communicate what's happening, feedback to us around how the programme and how the change is landing with staff. So we went out, I think we had about 150 people who came forward and said, we'd really like to be really change agents and like to be part of this so that we can advocate with our colleagues for the changes that are happening through the transformation programme. And actually we've got our first launch events this week, so I'm going to be talking to those 150 people, thanking them and sharing with them that their role is very much to work with the workforce and improve the sort of communication about what's happening with the transformation programme.
And that then, presumably, Debbie, all their hard work and efforts will feed into your corporate leadership team meetings where you identify those trends.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
Correct, yeah. Obviously, it's going to be an ongoing project, probably something really in view of the lessons learned over the last year, that change can be extremely voracious and you don't get much warning, and it's being nimble on your feet for the next thing.
It is, isn't it? And it's one of those things that, like any organisation, that if you're not moving forward, you're in essence going backwards, because the world is changing around you, and therefore you need to continue to change and adapt. And some people relate to that easier than others. So we want to create a culture that both managers are supporting, but actually the workforce is also supporting each other.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie. If we can move on to Andrew again. Andrew, I think you
Thank you, Chair. 2 observations and 3 questions. And the first observation chimes very much with what Debbie has just said. This meeting is perhaps the most useful to us as an audit committee, because we get to see the leadership, the senior leadership. And that in itself demonstrates the quality that we have in our senior leadership. But to comment further, Debbie, the Chief Exec of Birmingham Children's Hospital went from inadequate to outstanding, and when asked how she did it, she said, I asked the staff. So leadership is at 150 people in the organisation, or 1,500. It's at all levels. It's not just the top 6 of you. And you clearly grasped that. Secondly, an observation when Andrew Crookham was speaking, who gives one the assurance of somebody who's as cautious with public money as he might be with his own. I read the other day that a housing a shopping centre that was on the books of an organisation at 37 million has had to go in a fire sale at 4.9 million. Isn't it good that Lincolnshire hasn't gone down those risky speculative investments? And I think those district authorities that have done might be having a few sleepless nights. The questions to the Mark Baxter, the difficulty in getting station managers, is that predominantly an issue of in-service training and persuading the watch leaders to step up to the station manager role? And is that something we could do more of to support them in that in-service training? And then for Glenn Garrett, I expect a short answer to this first one. Is collaboration with the NHS as good as it has been, and could there be more? But and the second one to Glenn Garrett is there a once-in-a-lifetime recruitment opportunity for carers, people in retail and hospitality with the interpersonal skills that caring needs? Are they right to be recruited to enhance the resilience of the staff team in the care sector?
Mark, do you want to come in first, and then we'll go over to Glenn?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question, and it's something that I think that the response is it's a bit of a blended approach of how we need to support this. So absolutely, we are we're updating and we're looking at absolutely different ways how we can develop, encourage, and support all levels within our organisation in regards to career progression. Now, the particular where we have again a challenge is round about that middle management level is on twofold. One, in regards to there's a specific area within our protection teams where there are now some very technical and specialist skills that we need to develop and support, and that's been on the direct outcome of areas such as the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and in regards to Her Majesty's inspectorates that have had a national direction on how all services need to increase the technical abilities that services have. So we are, as much as the same as every other service around the country, are having to pick that up and to have investment and time and effort to develop our people through. So we're in a little bit of a period of actually doing that development as we speak. The second element is which I think is just as important, is the national picture in regards to middle management across the whole of the fire sector. So currently, the workforce planning across the whole of the sector, we're having a period where there's an awful lot of people that are coming to the end of their career that are leaving the organisations for no other particular reason that they've come to the end of the career, and it's just the timing nationally. And all services are at this moment in time recruiting nationally, and we're almost picking from the same pot of people. So there is a challenge in regards to bringing in some of the external technical and specialist skills within Lincolnshire. What I have to say is we have been successful in quite a few of those areas over the last 18 months. So I think it's really pleasing to see that actually Lincolnshire does seem to be able to attract some of the right skills and the technical and specialist skills to come into Lincolnshire. But it is definitely an area that we're putting together a more robust development pathway for all of our middle management cadre, which will also supporting our senior leadership development as well, because we're also having to think ahead about actually the senior leadership skills of our organisation as well, really. So yeah, it's really two areas which I think is the focus. Absolutely development within our own organisation, but it's also ensuring that we can still attract externally from the wider sector of bringing people into the organisation. I hope that covers the answer.
Thank you. And next, Glenn, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Rawlings. I think I read your lips correctly to say I should come in there. The collaboration with the NHS, if I can reassure you, Andrew, yes, I think it was previously, before COVID, excellent. I think it continues to be. In fact, we've probably gone further. And I'm sure that members of the committee will have looked at the media coverage of the health and social care policy paper that was leaked last week. It talks extensively about a direction of travel of further integration between health and social care, particularly in adults, but not exclusively. Two examples. Before COVID, it took me 18 months to get the NHS nationally to agree to bring in 5 residential homes to use NHS Digital and to be able to give primary care practitioners direct access to residents in the homes without having to visit. Within 3 months, it went from 5 homes to all homes in Lincolnshire. Within 3 months, COVID drove, as it were, a lot of change very quickly. And it's been a major success for us in helping primary care clinicians access residential settings. The second example, again, within the space of about 2 months, 31,500 clinically extremely vulnerable people's NHS details were shared with my staff so that we could make sure that they were sufficiently well supported throughout, particularly the first phase of the COVID pandemic. I don't think we're going to go back on any of those examples. In fact, I think we have seen an evolutionary step occur, probably for the wrong reasons, but it's the right thing to be doing. And I notice that the government is also intending to build on those experiences, both in the health and social care policy document and also in the social care document to follow. And then once in a lifetime opportunity to recruit carers. I have to say that it's not the skills that make carers great, it's the psychology and the disposition. We have got a major issue in social care in having to compete with a number of other sectors who can quite happily pay more than we can. Tesco's, for example, now pay a higher rate nationally than I can afford to, and I pay reasonable rates compared to some other councils in the country. But we have a lot of collaborative working with the domiciliary care sector in Lincolnshire. The providers themselves are now beginning to collaborate on recruitment and advertising costs. And we also have, I think, one of the better ways of sharing staffing across the council area, where we have one provider struggling to cope with the pressures. They are prepared to move staff around the county to provide cover in other areas run by different providers. So the level of collaboration begins to reflect that which is going to happen in the NHS, I think, with provider collaboratives. So I think this is all good stuff, but we just need not to lose the impetus for change that COVID has driven. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You mute, Chair.
It's very interesting sometimes that adversity drives them change in the most unexpected ways. So there are silver linings in some clouds sometimes. You have to struggle to find some in the recent pandemic, but I think it's the nature of life, is it not? That things can just turn on a pinhead at the moment's notice, and you have to try to cope with that as best you can. Just following on, I think from a few points that people have made, if that's okay with everyone. I know in the minutes we looked at the payroll provision and going on to Business World On and the transition from that from what Serco offered us previously, and I'd just like to sort of ask generally how that's going, and do we see that those sort of the payroll and regarding Business World is actually doing what we expect it to do at the moment and not causing sort of people dealing with the payroll or staff being paid any particular problems?
Andrew's coming in.
Which one?
It straddles across James and myself. The resources functions are predominantly the client, and James there is the sort of implementation lead. So progress is going well. We are in the sort of still in the process of testing and implementation design at the moment with our outsourced provider Hoople, who are helping us implement the new version of the system. We're currently looking at a go live date later in the year, November time, which is a bit further back than where we would have wanted. We've cited obviously COVID has been one of the impacts on that revised go live date, but also as well the complication of some of the existing system that we've got, and we acknowledge that time put in now managing some of those issues is going to be time well spent later on to avoid some of the issues like you talked about, like the historic payroll issues. Serco's payroll team are a key part of the design group that sits below the board that both James and I sit on. Ian Blundell, who's the manager there, in terms of feeding into that process to naturally to learn lessons from the past, really. And that's one of the key things we're really keen to make sure that we naturally don't have issues like we had previously. I don't know if James, you wanted to add anything to what I've said now.
Okay. You're fine. The one thing I was, we did have, it caused an awful lot of disruption and discontent across the board last time, and I think we said at the last meeting we want to avoid that, and I'm sure we will. But I think there's a recognition now that wasn't before that the payroll, particularly as it is complicated in an organisation like the County Council. So one question arising from that, perhaps to Andrew, would be how confident are you that the training of the staff in that regard is, in view of the fact that a lot of them are going to have to be working from home to do it, is providing what's required?
Yeah, so I think as a board, we acknowledge that the change management piece that goes around this, because it's not just the payroll staff. I think it's naturally important in paying people when they're supposed to be paid the right amount, etc.
Yeah,
that's a really important point, and get that, and then understanding the people who will be using that system so they can use it to the best effect. Absolutely, massively important. But it goes a lot broader than that. It's HR operatives, the finance team. It's held us back in finance for many a year, particularly from a transformative impact of where Michelle and I would want the team to be, but also as well within the business as well. Some of the issues that we're working through as part of the implementation are around using the system to its best effect, compliance within the rules of the system. So I think rather than just focusing on particularly, it's the entire organisation needs to sort of step up and use the system to its best effect, or we won't leave with the benefits from it otherwise. And big focus of the coming year really in terms of doing it. Just to build on the payroll side of things as well, just for a bit more assurance, there's a lot of data migration work that's going on at the moment actually around ensuring that things like mapping from the old system to the new system are as strong as they can be. Absolutely get the massive importance of the change management side of things.
Yeah, particularly it's just across the board with any project, isn't it, Andrew? It's made so much more difficult when you can't meet with your colleagues in person. Although you can speak, it's not the same as having at least a limited opportunity to meet people.
Absolutely, and we'll have to adapt to that. I think as you've seen today, hopefully you've got the assurance that the organisation has adapted to the challenges posed by this. Not least, a big shout out to how Democratic Services have made these meetings work, or how we've managed to do. Debbie's recently been leading some 100-150 people at a time, smarter working sessions, so that they are possible. You naturally, and we've just rolled out the HR employment policies as well to the entire managerial cohort of the workforce, and that's a successful training process that we've managed to roll out. So that we do really have to put the time in up front to make sure that the process has the output that you want it to. But a lot of thought on that at the moment.
Right. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. I'm looking if I've got any other questions from committee members, please, for executive directors and our senior fire officer. Well, perhaps I could, while you're contemplating that, any other points you might wish to make, if I could just ask about basically Debbie, Bob said about horizon scanning. So where do you think you hope for us to be this time next year? Obviously, very difficult question to answer because we don't know what's going to happen. But with a fair wind and some success on our vaccinations, which I must admit we're seeing some remarkable endeavours at the moment, if they pan out.
Oh yes, yes. Where would we like to be in a year's time? Certainly able to meet face to face and do a bit of shopping and go to a restaurant. I'm sure the same as all the rest of the committee. As I said, I mean, I think that there is clearly transformational change as well as modernisation. So I think we have got a good workforce, and obviously I'd want to continue to invest in our workforce. They're our greatest asset. We absolutely need to create the conditions so that staff are able to thrive, and that's clearly a leadership responsibility. So I want us to continue to invest in our workforce so that we have a distributed leadership style, so that all staff are empowered to do their very best. That they have the management oversight to help them to be empowered to do the best that they can possibly do, and to make sure that our tools, if you like, the enablers, in terms of particularly IMT as a key example, are able to respond to their needs. So I think the workforce is a huge issue that we need to continue to invest in, absolutely cherish them, because they're our strongest asset, and the more that we create the conditions so that staff thrive, the better. I think a key issue is our partnerships. Lincolnshire is a great place to live, work, visit, bring up families, but we can't support our communities without investing in our partnerships. Obviously, we've spoken about our partnerships with health, with our partnership with the district councils, with the business sector, all of those, with the police, the criminal justice system. All those are absolutely essential if we are to deliver the aspirations of the corporate plan. So the second issue, so the first issue I think is workforce, and the second issue that in terms of what we need to continue investing in is our partnerships. And then thirdly, as we've said, we've referred to the transformation programme. It is in its infancy. So again, I'd want that to begin to start impacting upon the aspirations of the corporate plan, so that we can see how we continue to improve how we engage with our customers, so that we are able to be much more agile and responsive in the way that we deal with our customers, with our businesses, and with each other, so that we are much more digital, I suppose, and much more efficient in the way that we operate. So those, I think, would be the big chunks of activities that I think we need to continue to focus on.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for your insights into that. Perhaps the one thing we haven't touched on a great deal, although we've talked around it, are the financial issues regarding just a 1 year budget. And I was wondering if Michelle could give us some insight into how into medium-term financial strategy and coping with the unknowns that are likely to come our way, perhaps in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. I can just comment on that. So I know one of the questions has been about horizon scanning, and we do include in the budget papers that will go to Council on the 19th of the month a medium-term strategy. So really about the principles, how we want to, fund the organisation and how we want to manage our finances, and some of the assurances and risks and all of those things built into our medium-term financial strategy. What we do as part of that is to take a 3-year look at where we think our finances will be. Only can do that based on current information, though, so very much estimating where we are in terms of, still don't know what the outcome of the fair funding review will be, still don't know what the outcome of the overall funding position for adult social care will be. So we have to make a lot of assumptions. So we have made assumptions based on current trends in cost pressures. We've made assumptions based on current trends in terms of funding. And whilst we've set a balanced budget for the current year, we are forecasting a deficit for the 2 years that follow. And that's one of the reasons we place importance on things like the financial volatility reserve, so we can proactively manage those positions going forward. And it's something that we've been very good at. The corporate leadership team and members have taken a very active view about looking at savings where they're needed, and things like that. So we will be looking early in the spring, I think, or into the summer, about what we need to do as a management team to balance the books going forward, but very much focusing on that medium term. The longer term's a bit more difficult at the moment without having those answers about the funding and things like council tax and business rates playing a big part in that as well. Hope that does that
yes, that's great, Michelle. I know it's like asking the impossible question, so we won't get it would compose this spend.
I suppose my response is we're trying to forecast. We're not just saying we can't do it because we haven't got the information. We're using all the information that we've got to try and best analyse where we think our position is, and we are doing that over the medium term.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm just looking. I haven't got any other hands up or any indications in the chat function that people want to ask officers any further questions. Perhaps just I'll pass to the executive directors in a few moments, probably for their to give us a summary of how they see things. And Debbie kindly has given us a horizon scan from the chief executive's point of view. Perhaps I could just bring in our audit team and Lucy and Matthew and just look to what pressures you think you're facing in the foreseeable future, and the perhaps with capacity issues, recruitment, those sort of things you could shed some light on.
Thank you, Chairman. So I suppose from an internal audit perspective, it is very similar to the council on a micro level. So it's recruiting the skills. So over the past 6 months, we've made a number of attempts to recruit skilled internal auditors with little success. So we are moving much more into the apprenticeship and grow your own. In that interim, that does mean that we do have to buy in additional sort of agency resources, which cost a bit more, but the CLT and particularly Andrew and Michelle have supported that initiative. So we've been working with some external firms to help buy in the specialist IT service. So I think that's the main issue in terms of the not a risk, because it's actually crystallised. So that's the main thing that we're managing at the moment, is looking at our talent management. The team, particularly, we've had some new management, as you know. Matt joined us. They've been working really hard, and the principals have been really looking at the different ways of working, our performance. So I'm much more comfortable in how they're having the oversight of the actual delivery plans, working with CLT. The combined assurance has given us that good insight and a bit of foresight of where the assurance needs to go going forward, and our plans are much more dynamic. And I think CLT have sort of personally fed back how engaged and supportive the internal audit team. So our key challenge is making sure we have sufficient resources. There's sufficient resources in terms of funding. The council has invested and values the internal audit insight. It's just the actual people and training the people. So we've got one apprenticeship coming to an end successfully. So we'll be looking to recruit over the summer. We did try to recruit over the sort of lockdown period, but people are naturally uncertain about moving, even though they do work at home and there's a bit more flexibility there. We found that people's mindset for when they were going through the recruitment process and candidates, especially when they were homeschooling and such like that, just weren't ready to go for an interview. So we just thought, no, we're just putting that on pause. So I think that's the main issue that we've got. Nationally, there's been some guidance issued around my head of internal audit opinion. There's some real scrutiny about our ability to give that independent insight. The report that has been presented to the committee today helps with that, where I can leverage assurance elsewhere. But CITFA has issued some guidance for the Audit Committee, which I'll be sharing with you at the next meeting, so that again, when you get our annual plans and progress report, you can challenge and see how we're handling that. So those are the main sort of concerns around internal audit function, is being able to give my head of internal audit opinion. But as you would have expected, we were already teed up to that. So I'd ask my team to think about the areas to discuss in the assurance mapping process last summer. So I'm confident that I'll be able to give an opinion in June and July.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much for that. So I think we're approaching just about 12 now. So if we could just perhaps turn to our executive directors and a fire officer. I think I'll probably come back to Debbie last, just to give a very brief summing up. But if perhaps each of you could just highlight any key messages which we'll perhaps haven't covered in our questions. So perhaps could I turn to I was just looking for perhaps Andrew, and then we'll work through.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so clearly a lot of the questions today have been around the finances, so I won't touch upon that anymore. I guess what I think the thrust of the questioning seems to have been towards the horizon scanning, hasn't it, really, and what the next year might look like. So maybe if I just touch upon that beyond what's in my text. So I refer in my section to welcoming the Public Protection Service into resources, which has been a very welcome addition to my team. And much of the focus will be on that area in terms of our outward facing services. So over the next year, there's a lot of work to do around the community safety offer, the partnership working, and I refer to the joint strategic needs assessment in the paper, but also on the other side of the service, coronial transformation, and there's a lot of work to do around there, potentially around a potential merger with the Northern Lincolnshire organisations, which we'll be looking at over the coming months. I guess the other bit around it is since we last met this time last year, I've brought in a new leadership structure within resources, and so audit and pensions have moved under Michelle. Information assurance has moved under David Coleman as our Chief Legal Officer, and I've brought in a new Assistant Director for Human Resources and Organisational Support, Tony Kavanagh. He joined us in November and is making a great impact, and will, I guess, if you're looking about the horizon scanning for the next year, Debbie's referred to the smarter working, we've referred to change management today around Business World. I guess the whole cultural development of the organisation and the role that team will play in that is going to be key, and will be, I guess, a key milestone and output from resources. I guess the other thing that is key for me in the next year is continuing the development of what I'd call the existing resources services, and that's about moving us from, I guess, just being the traditional compliance and beam counter function to the enabler and the supporter. I think James will probably say the same about his service areas as well. That's something as a CLT that we're really, really keen on, and it's a key thrust of that modernisation agenda as well, being as modern and as forward thinking as we can in our support services as we can, really. So, and with that, any other structural changes that might come, and different ways of working as well. So that's predominantly my focus, making sure that resources functions are as fit and as modern for purpose, whilst, I guess, not losing sight of many of the good things that we've talked about today. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark, could we ask you for your sort of summing up, if you will, on the as Chief Fire Officer, please? Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Again, a bit for us really been reflecting over the last 12 months is really shaping us and how we are going to be moving forward as a future. And I think probably a simple key message for us as a fire and rescue services is the way that everybody has responded and been so agile and flexible to meet the needs of the communities has really reinforced the reasons why we're all here, and that is to ensure that we are fit for purpose and we can serve the needs of our communities. And however that changes, and the reason why I think that's important for us, that we've reflected over the last 12 months, is previously that we wouldn't have really envisaged the level of support and the differing ways how we've had to, as a county council, had to adapt really quickly to support our communities. And I think we've all reflected. I think that's largely been done extremely effectively because we put the people of Lincolnshire at the heart of everything we do. So we've used this as an opportunity to shape and to structure the way we are going to do our business within the fire and rescue. We are in the process of reviewing our senior leadership team to ensure that we're going to be more future focused and fit for the needs of putting, as Debbie has quite rightly said, putting our people at the centre of what we're doing and how we're supporting them. So the next year is really going to be about putting our focus on the development of our own staff and having that commitment. And that's not always necessarily about committing additional resourcing, additional funding, but it is about recognising that we have to put more time, more effort, and more people-focused ways of working to ensure that people can be the best version of themselves while they're at work. So as while they're able to do that, then that's the way that we can do the best job we can to serve the people of Lincolnshire. So we also have a couple of really significant national areas that are going to be a focus for us. We have Her Majesty's Inspectorate coming into the organisation in the next 2 to 3 months, and that's going to be a full inspection to give the people of Lincolnshire the reflection of how they are being served by us as a fire and rescue service, and also to give assurance and confidence of the areas that we're doing extremely well, and also identify any areas of improvement that we need to focus on. So that's going to be a really clear focus for us to ensure that we are going to be best placed to show the inspectorate the best organisation that we are. And then clearly there's going to be other areas of development that is linked on a national stage, and I touched on it earlier from the Grenfell Tower inquiry, that is going to have a significant impact in regards to how we resource and we support many areas within our communities, particularly in regards to protection, to ensure that people are able to work and can be served safely. And we've got the right resources to be able to audit, inspect, and do whatever necessary actions we need to do to ensure that people are operating safely. So that they're going to be two really key areas that we're going to be focusing on in the next 12 months. But I suppose the overarching message, as I said at the bottom, is really reminded us, if we needed reminding, that actually we're here for the people of Lincolnshire, and however those needs change, either quickly or slowly, that we're the best place that we can respond to that. And I think the last 12 months have been a really good example of that. Thank you.
I'm sure we'd all agree, Mark, and thank you to you and your staff once again. Thank you very much. James, would you like to come in to just give us a resume on your commercial director?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'll keep this fairly brief. We've covered some of it already, and also it picks up on Andrew's point as well about the fact that both Andrew's and my services are predominantly around how we can support and help the whole of the council deliver the corporate plan, engage effectively with communities, and deliver effective and efficient outcomes for Lincolnshire. And that's our main role, I guess, really. We've talked a bit about IMT already, and whilst we've managed to work hard to get the organisation working in a different way due to COVID, it's around how we embed some of those things and also look to the future as well about how we can offer digital solutions and better ways of engaging and working with our communities in the future through technology. Technology is only part of that picture, obviously, but if that doesn't work, then that's a problem for the rest of the organisation. So we've got to get that right, and we'll continue to work hard on that. The transformation programme, Debbie's been through in some detail, and I think it's interesting, though, that when we talk about demand in adults and school transport, and those absolutely critical, both frontline and financial implications for us, they are within the transformation programme, and we are looking at those across the council and understanding how we can support those key priorities and get those right through the transformation programme as well. So I think that's an important factor there. We talked about Business World On as well, and there are other things like that too that sit within that programme that are really important. From a property point of view, I think we've worked well through COVID and obviously been affected quite significantly by COVID restrictions and new legislation that's come in. And how do we provide a small but secure managed workspace for those people who can't work from home, either because of issues at home or because of the fact that the nature of their role needs to be somebody who's either working in an office or, probably more significantly, working within our communities. So how can the property be right for that with the protection that it needs in these quite trying and difficult times? So property have been working really hard on that. But I think then when we look to the future, it's when we've determined what our smarter working approach is, then what are the property implications for us from an office point of view? So will we need all our offices in the future? Where will they be located? How can we best work in different ways? And again, property being that enabler and that deliverer of that service, I think will be important for us. When it comes to the commissioning side and the commercial side, we've heard about a number of contracts, and Glenn has spoken about the market and how we can help do that. My team helped provide Glenn with some of that support as well. And so, again, they're thinking of a future that's going to be different to what it's been in the past. That's where, again, from a commissioning point of view, a contractual point of view, we need to get that right, and we need to work well with those private sector partners as well.
You've frozen.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry, Chair, did I freeze?
Okay, James.
Apologies.
You left us.
Sorry. I was just mentioning about the contracts and how we've worked effectively to ensure business continuity with those, but also to think of the future as well and how we can manage those different private sector contracts as effectively as we can for again, to get the right outcomes for Lincolnshire. And I think that's it as a short summary, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. I don't think we've lost too much of you. It's only a couple of seconds. Totally sorry about that. Thank you once again. Andy, can I pass over to you?
Thanks, Councillor Rawlins. I suppose, again, just a quick summary of things that are either in the report or perhaps haven't come out as much in the debate today. I suppose, as with Mark, a lot of the service delivery activity is very public-facing in the Place Directorate. And I think, again, the last 12 months have really sort of highlighted the ability to focus in terms of what the residents, businesses, etc. around the county actually require from our services. That will have a bearing on how we plan for the future in terms of considering the demand on our services, perhaps in a different sort of way. So the lessons we've learned over the last 12 years, I think, will continue to inform our priorities and perhaps different ways of working. And again, all of that will tie into some of the smarter working agenda that's been alluded to in terms of the authority as a whole. I suppose the other three things I just pick up on that perhaps haven't come out as much in the debate to this morning so far, the importance of our contract management activities. So again, our partnership work in the context of working with other organisations includes our contractors, our suppliers, and we need to make sure that we use our contracts effectively to get the best out of them. As you know, within the COVID period, we've gone live with the new mobilisation of the term maintenance contract with Balfour Beatty. A real challenge to actually do that, but I think the relationship that we've developed with them and the way that we're working with them has actually brought dividends, and there's a shared ambition to actually do what's right for the residents of Lincolnshire in terms of how we manage our highway sort of system. It's one of those areas where we do need to get back in a room with them and actually be face to face with them to actually exploit that further. It's a credit to both parties of what we've actually achieved to date. But as I say, we will benefit from actually sort of developing those relationships more effectively. On a similar vein, some significant challenges over the last sort of 12, 18 months in managing some of our big capital projects. Again, some COVID related, others as a result of other issues that should have been managed differently. So again, in conjunction with Lucy and her team, we have revised a number of issues that will have a bearing on how we manage some of our major capital projects. And again, I suppose the underlying message there is about making sure that they are much more addressed as being corporate projects rather than just being delivered in a particular service area. So my summary in my report does actually flag up the programme entry award that we've had for North Highcombe Relief Road, and we are approaching that project differently from the off, as opposed to perhaps how some of our previous projects have been developed. And then the third thing I would just emphasise, Debbie referred to the SPF earlier. There's also the Levelling Up Fund, and our collective approach to how we actually pursue funding bids from government needs to be quite focused in terms of actually what our priorities are. And again, earlier comments around the impact of Brexit, impact on the high street, to actually make sure that we've got a very coordinated approach in terms of actually what we're bidding for, and making sure that the monies that are available, because being realistic in the short to medium term, the money available from government is going to be stretched. We need to make sure we deliver the best from those funding sources as we go forward.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much. Glenn, can I pass over to you, please?
Thank you, Councillor Rawlings. So, looking ahead, we have a government whose agenda was frustrated by COVID. I think we will see in 21-22 a government agenda that has a lot to say about health and social care, mental health, health and care, social care, long-term plan and funding. So I think our year is going to be very, very busy as a result of that. The benefits of COVID is that the government has seen the weaknesses in the system and intends to use the legislation to make change. Digital, how we respond to people who come to us will be fundamentally different in the future, and how we practice in the professions that we employ and with our colleagues. So a lot of work to do there. Inequalities, COVID will make the inequalities that we had pre-COVID that much worse. And I think across the public sector, we will need to find common purpose in better supporting people, not just because of the economic damage that has been caused, but also as a result of social disruption between and within families. And then finally, Chair, if I may, housing, a big agenda, and as Debbie rightly says, a key strategic partnership with districts. And I'll leave members of the committee with one thought. We have to think system in the future, not service. There is absolutely little point, in my view, of having an outstanding provider if several other providers in the same sector are inadequate. It's far better that we all get to good if we are to truly serve our populations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you. Michelle, perhaps I could turn to you with a view on the anything we haven't covered on the financial issues, which we've hello. Thank you. Michelle's come up.
Sorry, it's just taken a bit of a while to get the unmute off. I think that's fine. I think we've covered quite a lot of it, Chairman. I think the challenge for the finance team going forward will be considering what the longer term impacts are on our budgets of the last 12 months. And the team are, doing a great job of bringing all that information together on the current situation. But the work we need to do now is working with the service directors and the exec directors to understand what that might mean for us going forward. The risks for the team at the moment are ones we've already talked about. So the BW upgrade in November, very much a key factor for the finance team. One thing that I will say is to assure the committee is one of the reasons for the delay in the deadline for the implementation was because the project team came back and they listened to the finance team, they listened to the HR team about making sure we do some of those test runs, so the payroll test runs needing to be done, and when were difficult times for the payroll team to do that. So very much being listened to in terms of implementing that, but still a key challenge for the team, and one that we want to get right. So the key challenges for our team this year just will really be about the immediate issues around managing COVID and also managing the BW project at the same time as that, and then making sure we've got that longer term view going in, and reacting to whatever comes out of government around funding and what's coming back from the exec directors about the ongoing pressures due to COVID.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for that. Heather, Children's Services.
Thank you, Chair. I think we covered a lot of our risks in the discussion. So just to keep it brief, I think we need to look at the placements. We need to continue to monitor the market. We need to look to develop our own place in the market so that we can avoid some of those market moves. Obviously, a big part of our work over the next year is going to be supporting our education sector and supporting young people with the examinations, with the return to school, implementing all of the guidance that comes through centrally. We also need to continue to focus on our home to school transport challenges. We've got a review currently underway. We'll need to see what comes out of that review and consider what we need to do going forward. We've got a care review and a high needs review being conducted nationally. We'll need to look at what comes through from that in terms of recommendations. But as Mark said, I want to echo how proud I am of the way in which our staff have responded to the pandemic and the way in which they continue to ensure that the risks that we identify are mitigated as far as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Matthew, would you like to comment on your role as audit manager in terms of what you can see as challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Well, I think Lucy gave a really comprehensive answer about that earlier. I think I would just want to add that this exercise is just incredibly useful to us. And as you know, it gives us a real insight into the organisation. I think it's a fantastic, at the moment, yardstick for audit, and we get to meet and talk to a huge array of managers. So in terms of setting the plan going forward and really triangulating our assurance and risk and where to concentrate our resources, this is just a really good, really useful exercise to go through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Lucy, would you like to say anything else, or you?
No, thank you, Chairman. I'm fine, thanks.
You're okay. Okay, thank you. Again, I think we touched on your thoughts earlier on. And then returning to Debbie, would you just like to say anything else, Debbie, or do you think we've covered most of the things?
Hi, thank you very much. Just to say, I think it's been a really useful morning this morning. Been excellent conversations around some of the challenges and a really good opportunity for the exec directors and myself to share, I suppose, what's been happening over the last year and share some of our current risks. I suppose the only thing that I would like to add is really just to say that, and I said it in my introduction, that this year has been a bit of a sort of crisis year. So I'm hoping to be able to do a bit of a pause and reflect and sort of take stock about where we are with regard to our workforce and our culture. Look at how then we can embed the corporate plan. So looking to be a bit more, I suppose, proactive rather than reactive as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, members, we have the recommendations, but before we move to that, again, I would very much like to thank all our executive directors and our chief executive and our chief fire officer. And if you could convey by your meetings our very sincere thanks to all our staff. I think have had to work in very challenging circumstances, and we're most grateful for all their efforts. Thank you. So we could move to the recommendation, members, which is that the committee review the combined assurance report, seeking assurance over the adequacy of the council's governance, risk and control environment, and makes recommendations on any further scrutiny arrangements or actions. We have touched on areas, through conversation, which we'll see about school transport and digital working and all of those things we've touched on. So I think we've scrutinised those in terms of our role as a committee. And are you happy that we have adequate assurance, members? Thank you. Okay. So given the recommendation, Paul, you said you were happy if I move the report. You were happy to second.
Quite happy, Chairman. I think the debate that we've had has been really excellent, and I've found the summation up by all of our senior staff towards the latter part. Extremely useful. Very happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So could members, all those in agreement to the recommendation, could we have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Turn on the cameras. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we're all there. Thank you. I think that's unanimous, members. Thank you very much.
It is, Chairman. That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. So if we could then move on, members, to the item 5, which is the work plan on pages 45 to 54. And perhaps I could turn over to Lucy just to present this for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this sets out your forward plan for items on your agendas. The next meeting date has changed, so that's moved into earlier in March. As you can see, most of the agenda item relates to our external auditors. So our external auditors have had a change in staff, so it's an opportunity for you to meet the new auditors. And also there was a Financial Reporting Council report issued on the quality of the external auditors, and the chairman's asked us to bring that to the meeting, so you'll be able to see what that report is stating around our external auditors. Just out of interest, Mazars were one of the auditors that needed some improvement, so we felt that was something that needed to be on your radar, so we shared the report with the chairman, and that's being brought to your committee next meeting. The others are their plan for the audit, and also the management responses to some international auditing standards around material misstatements and fraud within potential fraud within the accounting process. So we've rejigged some of the other and moved some of the other agenda items because the guidance and sort of good practice guidance hasn't been finalised by central government or best practice professional groups. So we've moved those to June, but we've not removed them. We just shifted them slightly to help with the workload. So I think that's all I have to say on the matter. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lucy. And obviously, to reiterate to members, the 19th of March is not a Monday, it is a Friday. Okay, so everybody remember to have it on a Friday this next time. So if everyone, I'm sure everyone's in agreement with that. We've all agreed to attend, I think so. That's great. Thank you. I was just saying if I had. Oh, Rob, sorry. Oh, yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. Turn to Rob. Thank you.
Yeah, it was just while we're planning our work plan, the idea of horizon scanning actually perhaps comes to mind, doesn't it, as a potential idea. We do seem to have a seriously full meeting on the 19th of March.
We do, yes, very full.
So I'm not suggesting that, but what I am saying is that perhaps we could agree to put it into the 14th of June meeting so that A, the officers have got plenty of time to scan, and B, we don't forget about it. Not that I'm saying we would do them, but strike while the iron's hot.
Can we note that, Lucy?
Noted, and I'll work with Cheryl to coordinate that through for a briefing paper for that meeting.
Thank you very much. Andrew, you...
Yes, thank you, Chair. Glenn Garrett said something very pertinent and incisive. He says, think system. Now, the NHS is bracing itself, as you saw in the weekend papers, for a white paper on integrated care systems. And we've had examples today of adult social care and the NHS working closely together. We're going to have to do it at scale. So maybe this is one that Glenn will have to scan the horizon on. But at some point in the future, I believe we need to understand what system working means for this county council in conjunction with its various partners. Don't know if Glenn's got a view.
I completely agree, Mr. Middleton. Completely agree.
So perhaps we could look at some assurances on that when we get more of the shape of things to come, when we know more clearly what that would be.
Not next meeting, Chair.
No, I know. Well, I think
sometime when we've understood it.
Oh, yeah, okay. So we've got that on the work plan for future meetings. Okay. So do any other members wish to contribute? Rob?
Yeah, on that point, one of the things that stood out to me was the point that's just been made by Andrew about the relationship, the future relationship between the NHS and local government. And I was also want to link in something that James said in relation to IT. One of the things, we are expanding our IT, but it does seem as though one of the fundamental issues that we have to get right, and I'm not suggesting we're not going to, but I'm emphasising this, is the IT relationship between the NHS and our authority. Because as we become more and more interlocked and less priority is given in the sense of the shift of the NHS and maybe ourselves actually in terms of in-house working, the more that we've got to be not just IT compatible, but it's got to be seamless between the two big organisations if we're going to be working so closely together. And that's a point that I'm sure everybody's got in mind, but I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention.
Thank you. I'm sure everybody would agree with you on that one. Thank you. Okay. So we've got those two noted, Lucy, which is to look at the future relationship with the local authority and the public health or the health service, and also the IT relationships with that, which should probably come into some of the things with assurances on the digital agenda. And obviously, as Rob said, on the horizon scanning the price. That okay. So we have the work plan, and I'm proposing that is noted with the comments that we have received. Do I have a seconder? The work plan, if I propose it. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Okay. All those members in favour, please raise their hands. Thank you. Yes, I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, that concludes the meeting, everyone. And thank you for your attendance today. And I think, well, here I don't quite know what it's doing wherever everybody is. It's actually managed to stop snowing at the moment. So it's violently cold in my kitchen. So